All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. John Eastman is somebody I've been admiring afar for many, many years. He is a constitutional law expert, a professor at Chapman University, or was, until the left got a hold of him and decided that he was going to be their whipping boy this last election season. And he has been taken to the cleaners. He's been taken to the woodshed. He's been tested, tried, impoverished, all because he was Donald Trump's attorney and put forward ideas, legal theories. He wrote briefs, and he fought like hell for Donald Trump. Now he is coming through, I think, maybe the worst of it. We'll see. And John Eastman, I admire you for all of the above. I have listened to you for years on the radio with Hugh Hewitt, and I've been a fan for a very long time. And so thank you very much for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you today?
I'm well, although your audience will see my bandage on my head. I had a little surgery this morning, so my apologies for that. But I'm ready to go, and I'm delighted to be back on your show.
I'm very happy that you got your basal cell all fixed up. I've got two on my face right here, and I, thank goodness, got them taken off, and they're not metastasizing kinds of cancers. So we both know that. But when you say the word cancer, for God's sake, people just go, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible." It's like, I'm going to live. And so, you get them. You're fortunate to have lived as long as we have. So you, of course, have been one of Donald Trump's attorneys, and throughout the years, you have undergone some incredible travails. You've made a movie, or someone has on your behalf, called The Eastman Dilemma, Justice or Lawfare. Let's take a look at The Eastman Dilemma. Well, I think we have the trailer, perhaps we don't, but nevertheless, it's a movie, and you've decided that this is actually a dilemma, but actually it seems to me that it's not justice, it's lawfare. Tell me a little bit about the movie. Tell me about the debut of it yesterday at Mar-a-Lago and why you got the idea to do it.
Well, there was a producer in Colorado where my wife and I were teaching until I got canceled from that university as well after January 2021. And he said, "We need to tell your story." And then there was a group out of Hollywood that created a company called Madison Media Fund in order to fund movies for conservatives, because Hollywood is pretty much boycotting them. And we put that together, and they came up with a wonderful storyline. They wanted to tell what I knew about the election and the illegality in the conduct of the 2020 election, and the legal strategy that I designed to deal with it. And then the lawfare that has existed ever since. And, I'm unindicted co-conspirator number 2 in D.C. in Jack Smith's ridiculous indictment against the former president and now President-elect Trump. Actually, after today, President Trump. He was elected today at the Electoral College meeting in Congress. I was indicted in Georgia. I was indicted in Arizona. I went through, and I'm still going through, the longest and most expensive bar disciplinary proceeding in history in California. That's still up on appeal. And all because I dared, like the little boy, I dared to say that the king has no clothes. I dared to say that there was illegality in the election. I think it affected the outcome. We really ought to investigate that if we're going to still have consent of the governed in this country. Because when you have an election in which one side cheats and they steal the election as a result, you no longer have consent of the governed. And the government ceases to be the entity that works for us, and they increasingly think that they have us to work for them, that we are sheep to do what their bidding is. And that's just not who we are as an American people. It's certainly not who I am, and it's certainly not what we inherited, and it's certainly not the legacy I want to leave my children and grandchildren. So this movie's out there, and I note It's not Eastman's dilemma. I've never had a dilemma about this, whether I would fight for this or not. I think the real dilemma is, again, for lawyers elsewhere, are we going to stand by and let this lawfare go and destroy our justice system, or are we going to stand with Eastman and fight for justice? That's a question that a lot of people have to answer for themselves, because way too many people have been sitting on the sidelines while these egregious abuses of our criminal justice system, our bar disciplinary system, have been taking place.
Mm-hmm. Your attorney, one of your attorneys, Harvey Silverglade, who's been a guest on this program, talked a little bit about your case and how important it is that people have attorneys. Let's listen to what he had to say.
What Eastman was suggesting was strategies. And it was perfectly lawful to this is an unprecedented situation. He was giving unprecedented advice for strategies. And there's nothing illegal about that. It has been turned into a claim conspiracy. I believe this prosecution is going to fail.
I hope so. If this didn't seek to ruin the lives and reputations and bankrupt these people who are now caught up in this indictment, could you possibly call it is it a nuisance suit?
Well, what it is, this telephone book of an indictment, I think this could have been done, in a dozen pages. I think it has been done this way in order to bankrupt the defendants and make it impossible for them to get good defense. I know that Rudy Giuliani is running out of money, has run out of money. He's one of the main defendants. Eastman's can solve that problem only in one way. If all, he's not wealthy, he's an academic. Eastman can solve the problem by getting a severance. Then he could afford a robust defense. 3 weeks, we get an acquittal. He doesn't have appellate costs. It's over. But that's not what Fannie Lewis is trying to do. She uses the taxpayers' money, so she's got a big purse.
Yeah, when you're working with house money, it's pretty easy to.
Yeah, they're working with my money because I'm a taxpayer. I'm
right.
paying my defense and I'm paying my prosecutors, as we all are. It's insane. Look, and what's worse is these state prosecutors don't seem to have gotten the message that the American people sent so resoundingly on November 5th in 2024. They are doubling down on the prosecutions. They've all said, whether New York against Trump or Fani Willis, even though she's now been disqualified, she immediately appealed that decision. And another prosecutor down there has volunteered to take over the case if she stays disqualified. The Attorney General of Arizona has just doubled down. And it just was revealed about 3-4 weeks ago that she hired one of the leading anti-Trump lawfare groups in the country to help her prepare the prosecution strategy.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
States United Democracy Center, the same outfit that filed the bar complaint against me in California and has filed disbarment complaints against lawyers all over the country, was hired by the Attorney General of Arizona to prepare the prosecution strategy, which she then followed to a T before the grand jury to get the indictment, making false statements, ignoring key evidence that exonerated us, all of those things. That's like hiring a fox to prepare the safety plan for the chickens in your hen house. This is an outrageous abuse of prosecutorial discretion, and it never should have happened. And I hope the courts there in Arizona will see it for what it is and dispense with this thing relatively quickly. But in the meantime, we had a judge that had to recuse himself for his own bias. And now we've got another judge and we're back with another round of hearings and what have you, all the time racking up the legal fees and the time that I spend on defense instead of helping the president go on offense.
Yeah. Unindicted co-conspirator number 2 in the D.C. courts, indicted co-conspirator number 3 in Arizona and Georgia, and indicted co-conspirator number 13 in Arizona. You face an uphill battle with so many of them, except the federal one. Has that been dropped for you or just for Trump?
The federal one has been dropped for everybody because only Trump was indicted and the case was dismissed. And one presumes that effective January 20th, with a new sheriff in charge of the Department of Justice, that they won't take it upon themselves to do anything else against anybody else. But the federal government and the president has no authority over these state prosecutors. Other than this, my view is that what's going on here is a nationwide conspiracy to get Trump and to deprive his supporters of their First Amendment and Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment and Sixth Amendment rights. A conspiracy to deprive people of constitutional rights is itself a federal felony. And I hope the incoming leadership at the Department of Justice investigates that, and as I suspect they will find criminal conduct and prosecutes that criminal conduct, because I think that's the only way this stuff is going to stop.
I think that Fani Willis and Wade, her paramour, and the special prosecutor, him going to D.C. to consult with the AGs, I think that there was that's certainly proof that he consulted with those guys. And
he claims he doesn't remember whether he talked about the Georgia case when he was there meeting with White House counsel.
That doesn't
but he billed the Georgia team for those meetings.
Right.
So either he submitted false bills or he lied under oath that the meeting had nothing to do with the Georgia case. Hey, he's got himself in a bit of a box there, I think.
You talk about what's going on in Arizona and picking up this Lawfare firm to come up against you to take you to the cleaners. Does it by any chance have anything to do with either Mark Elias or Norm Eisen? Tell me about those two people.
Well, Norm Eisen is certainly involved with the States United Democracy Center outfit, and this is what they're doing. They're getting well funded. I don't know if Mark Elias has anything to do with them, but they're certainly fellow travelers. It's well funded. That and the 65 Project is another outfit. David Brock, the founder of Media Matters. 65 Project actually bragged that our goal is not just to get these lawyers disbarred, but to make them so toxic in their firms and their communities that no lawyers will want to take on these kind of cases again. Now think about what that means. This cycle was election integrity. But if you go protest a school board meeting for ridiculous school policies, putting boys swimming against your daughters in track meets, or 50-year-old men exposing themselves in the public restrooms in the schools, and you protest that and they come after you for disrupting the school board meeting, and lawyers, if they take that representation, are going to get hounded out of their practices. I mean, what's going to happen with our system of justice?
You were talking about Norm Eisen and Mark Elias and this Lawfare organization, and I was going to ask you a little bit about 65 Project because, of course, they're going after all Trump's attorneys, and I don't know of anything more conspiratorial or unethical than people going after other attorneys simply because they are providing defense to a person who needs an attorney. And I know that one of the key cogs at 65 Project is also an attorney for, you'll love this, Ray Epps of January 6th fame, as well as he was the attorney who brought a defamation lawsuit against Fox News. So my guess is he's got a lot of irons in the fire, and he's getting a lot of cooperation from people who prefer not to fight.
Well, that's right. And I if I recall correctly, a bar complaint has been filed against him as well. The 65 Project filed a bar complaint against me with the Supreme Court of the United States. It was so chock full of false statements that we urged the court to look into it, false statements that they made. Look, they need to be held accountable for this abuse of our justice system, because if they're not, the next time this crew gets into power, they'll do it again. They need to be held accountable so that people won't ever do it again. And look, we think having an attorney is so important that in our criminal justice system, if you can't afford one, we provide one for you. That's how critical it is. They've breached attorney-client privilege. They're ignoring the rights of attorneys and their clients to free speech, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. They're shredding the protections of the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures. They seized my phone, refusing to show me the warrant. Even when they showed me the warrant, it didn't list the phone on there. It says electronic devices listed in the attached affidavit, which to this day they've never provided. And I strongly suspect the phone they took from me was not on it because I had just recently purchased it. They seized all of the data, and I said, that's a general warrant, the very reason we have the Fourth Amendment. They said, well, we're not allowed to look at it until we get a second warrant. And then the next thing I know,
then you can't have it. Then you don't have a warrant for it.
That's right. And the next thing I know, they've got the documents, they've got the communications, and they're asking me which is privileged. I said, how do you have those? Well, we got the second warrant. I said, I haven't seen it. Well, we were in possession of the phone, so we served that warrant on ourselves. I mean, it's just, this is absurd. And it's taken the Constitution's Fourth Amendment and just ripped it to shreds.
Wow. How would you like the new Trump administration to proceed on these issues, with respect to you and other attorneys and even the J6ers? Yeah,
I like the idea that the J6ers should just all be pardoned, even those that engaged in acts of violence. Now, except for those that were on the payroll of the FBI or were part of the Antifa mob that was directed to buy Trump gear and infiltrate the crowd and then cause as much violence and havoc as they could. They should have the keys thrown away on their imprisonment. But everybody else was either there peacefully, went in, was invited in by police officers, or even those that engaged in violence, I think were provoked into that because they were part of a rally that police unnecessarily fired tear gas and rubber bullets on and flashbangs into. And then, you get that coming at you. Some people react, and that's called provocation in the law. And in any case, they have served more time disproportionately compared to all of the thugs that were participating in the violent riots, the mostly peaceful riots in the summer before the 2020 election. And by the way, I think those riots were strategically designed to scare judges away from actually taking up the serious illegality in the 2020 election. We saw a leak that the New York Times or the Washington Post, I forget which one, reported about Chief Justice John Roberts saying we can't take these cases up because they'll burn our cities down. I think that meant that that activity over that summer had its strategically desired effect. This is not the way we operate in this country. And I hope this incoming Department of Justice and FBI leadership will investigate that fully and, if warranted, bring the necessary prosecutions to hold people accountable.
That's interesting. I did recall hearing that some time ago. I've just never had anybody breathe life into it the way you have, with as much gravitas as you have. Speaking of which, are you doing any legal work for Trump at all right now, or where do you stand with him right now?
Well, other than the legal work I do in my own case, where he's a co-defendant down in Georgia, no, I'm not. So, funny little story. One of the issues there is First Amendment protection, and is the indictments violated. One of the attorneys said, "Well, none of us are First Amendment specialists. We need to hire First Amendment specialists." And somebody else said, "Well, we've got one of the leading guys in the country. Why don't we have him argue it?" And somebody else pointed out that no, he's a defendant. That's probably not a good idea.
Well, that's amazing. Can you tell me, give me the Reader's Digest version of the fact that your cases against you have just ruined your life? What happened?
Well, they certainly shifted my path, but they haven't ruined my life for this reason. I believe our country was on the precipice of losing some of the most important freedoms that our founders bequeathed to us. The right to consent to the governed. Now, the right to a government that works for us. The notion that we have inalienable rights from God, not from government. That was all at risk of being lost, maybe irretrievably lost. And for whatever reason, I ended up in a leading role on the front lines of that battle to preserve our freedoms, to preserve our heritage. And I can't think of anything more important to be doing than what I'm doing, fighting back against this lawfare and this tyrannical activity of our government. Because I don't want one day my kids and grandkids to have to suffer what we've been dealing with. And because I have the wherewithal and the tenacity to get in that fight, I can't think there's anything more important to be doing.
The lawsuits that were brought to go after the results of the 2020 election, those were never really litigated, were they? They were dismissed for standing or dismissed for a variety of other reasons, but we never actually got a full airing of the grievances, did we?
We did not. There was one case I was brought before the election based on an illegal guidance on how they were going to conduct the election in Michigan or Wisconsin, I forget which state. And the judge dismissed it because it was just a guidance. Until they actually violate the law, your case is not right. And then when they violated the law on election day and they brought the case the next day, another judge said, you can't wait till your guy loses to bring these cases. You should have brought it months ago. And they dismissed it on what's called laches grounds. In other words, you waited too long. These are the kind of things we were dealing with. You know, the regular citizen voters didn't have standing, so the candidate brought cases, and then he was held not to have standing. Only the legislature had standing. And then legislators brought cases, and they were held not to have standing. Only the candidate has standing. So they were playing these whack-a-mole shell games in order to avoid having to confront the serious charges of illegality that occurred in the conduct of the election. And we all saw it with our own eyes. You know, you don't have to make this stuff up. You saw it. You saw them getting rid of signature verification. You saw them barring the bipartisan teams in nursing homes and you know, the turnout rates going from 25% to nearly 100% in nursing homes in Wisconsin. We all saw that. We saw them grab ballots out of a place called the Chicago Warehouse outside of Detroit. I mean, think about that name. You know, the Chicago Warehouse. That's just a brazen statement that we're going to steal this election if we need to. We all saw it. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows that Joe Biden from his basement didn't get 15 million more votes than Barack Obama did. Didn't increase turnout among Black Americans than Obama got. We all know that. I mean, it's just patently absurd.
Well, we all know that, but I think that we suspect that. But is there proof of that $100,000 or 100,000 votes being put in the back of a truck? I've seen the guy talking. Do we really know these kinds of things? But you actually distill these issues in the intervener brief that you filed with the U.S. Supreme Court in Texas v. Pennsylvania. And you said, Pennsylvania Secretary of State issued guidance purporting to suspend the signature verification, which you mentioned. In Michigan, the Secretary of State illegally flooded the state with absentee ballot applications mailed to every registered voter, despite the fact that the law strictly limits the ballot application process. You talk about the people in the nursing homes. And in Georgia, the Secretary of State has instituted a series of unlawful policies, including processing ballots weeks before Election Day, destructively revising signature and identity verification procedures. And you list other things. Anybody can go read it. It's at the Supreme Court. And you can find it just by putting some very basic things into your Googler to find it. These are so outrageous, all done in the name of COVID under emergency laws, but they broke the existing laws in order to do that, John Eastman. And my question to you, how do you wrest back a clean election for federal elections? If states don't want to do that, why is our presidential election held in thrall, if you will, or at the worst thing ever that the state of Wisconsin does, for example? How can we separate those two things?
Well, you know, one of the things is we got to adhere to the Constitution. And the first thing the Constitution says about this is the legislatures of the states are the ones that have the sole authority to direct the manner for choosing presidential electors. And the issue in the 2020 election was these state election officials, partisan Democrats, almost 201, except for Brad Raffensperger down in Georgia, altered the rules of the game without legislative approval. They had no legal authority to do that. And unfortunately, the court took a path on addressing those kind of questions, despite strong dissents from several justices of the Supreme Court saying we really need to take this up. And it remains a festering sore because those things were never addressed. Luckily, this last election was too big to rig. The quotation that President Trump came along with. But the next close election, if they do this again, I fear for our country if people get to the point where they don't think our elections matter. Because if you don't have free and fair elections, you don't have consent to the government, people will start thinking about other ways to control an out-of-control government. And, you've got to get this right. Look, we pride ourselves the world over on being the most credible and free and fair in the what are the people in Iraq or Iran or Venezuela going to do if we come supervise their elections when we've been dealing with this here with the lack of transparency, with the illegality? They're going to laugh at it. And rightly so. We have got to fix this to restore our place on the world stage as the nation of integrity on these elections. And we have to restore that integrity for our own people to understand, win or lose, it was a fair process. And that I don't think we have as a result of 2020. And, we barely scratched the surface on exposing it. But that's one of the reasons we did this film, to start exposing it some more, because sunlight is the best disinfectant there is.
The movie is called The Eastman Dilemma, Justice or Lawfare, and go see it. And it was debuted last night, or as we speak, at Mar-a-Lago. One last thing, because you have to go. This is the first time this century that Democrats have not resisted and or disputed an election a Republican won. Just thought I'd let you know that.
Well, and I should say where people can watch it streaming is on MadisonMediaFund.org. It should be available by the end of the day on Monday, January 6th.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John Eastman.
Thank you, Victoria.
We appreciate it. And thank you very much for tuning into the Adult in the Room podcast. And subscribe, share, and get John Eastman's movie and his testimony out there, won't you? Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1ACast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.